This is note taker 23 on the Kingdom Plantae. This note taker will focus on our seed plants. On note taker 22, we discussed our seedless plants, which were our mosses and our ferns. These were plants that reproduced by spores. Our seed plants, which we're going to focus on this note taker, are any type of plant that actually grows from a seed. Now with our seed plants, they are all vascular. Vascular means that they have a transport system inside to move water and food around the plant. The two types of vascular tissue in seed plants are the xylem and the phloem. The xylem is what's responsible for carrying water and minerals up from the roots of the plant all the way through to the leaves where photosynthesis will take place. The phloem carries food throughout the plant. So once the food has been made, it'll be dumped into the phloem and carried back to the roots to nourish the roots, to the stem and flower and all the other parts. You do need to know the difference between these two types of transport tubes. For a hint, if you can remember that xylem starts with an X and water starts with a W, they're close to each other in the alphabet. So our xylem carries water. The phloem has the same sound at the beginning of the word, the f sound, and food. So phloem carries food. Your seed plants will also all have true roots, true stems, true leaves. Here is a cross-section of the root of a plant, and you can see in the middle the larger circles, which is labeled xylem. Those are the tubes that carry water from the root up to the top of the plant, where it's used for photosynthesis. And each of the little areas around the xylem that are marked with the letter S, those represent the phloem tubes. So those tubes will be responsible for carrying food. Now we're going to take a look at the three parts of the plant, the roots, the stems, and the leaves. And with each of these, there are two types of roots, there are two types of stems, and there are two types of leaves that you will need to know. So we're going to start with the roots. The job of the roots, it's actually got two jobs. The first is to anchor the plant in the ground, so that when the storm comes along and the wind is blowing, the roots hold the plant steady in place. The second job, and probably a very important part, is that they absorb water and minerals from the soil. And this is so important because they need that water for photosynthesis. So when we look at roots, we have two basic root types. The first type is fibrous roots. Fibrous roots are going to branch out. You're going to have lots of roots that all branch out from the bottom of the plant. Trees, most of your trees will have fibrous roots. Your taproot is one long, thick main root, and it may have tiny little root hairs on it to help it absorb water. If you've ever eaten a carrot before, a carrot is actually the root of the carrot plant, and the carrot is a taproot. Cactus and dandelion also have taproot systems. And we'll talk about the layers. You are going to need to know the layers of the root. The outer layer, epidermis, and if you want to refer to the word wall in class, epi means outer, dermis means skin. So the epidermis is the outer layer of the root that gives it protection. And on the epidermis, it may also have a few root hairs. And what these do is it gives more surface area for water to be absorbed. Right inside the epidermis, you will find the cortex. Cortex is where the food is stored. So when a plant is going through photosynthesis and making food, it will actually store it up in the cortex so that in winter, like in your trees, even though they may lose their leaves, so they don't do photosynthesis, they still need to be able to live through winter. So they will use these stores of food to make it through winter. And the last part of the root that you have to know is the root cap. This is almost like the hard hat at the end of the root. As a root is growing through the soil, it grows from the tip. So it's constantly growing and growing and spreading out And if there's a rock under the ground, it needs some protection when it bumps into the rock so that it doesn't damage the end of the root. Because if you damage the root, then the plant cannot get water. Here are pictures of the taproot, which is the one main root on the left, and then the fibrous, and you can see in there that is actually a little kernel of corn. That's what corn plants grow from. And you can see there are lots of roots kind of going off in every direction with our fibrous root. And here's a picture of the layers of a root. This picture shows the epidermis in the dark green with the root hairs on it. Right inside, the light green is the cortex, which is the store of food. The red in the center would be your xylem, and the little yellows in the center would be your phloem. Now, moving up the plant. From the roots, we're going to head up towards the top of the plant, and we're going to meet the stem. The stem has two jobs. The stem is the pathway, it's kind of the main highway of the plant, where all the food and water and minerals need to pass through. The second job of the stem is it holds the plant up so that the plant is able to get sunlight so it can make food. And we're going to have two types of stems. The first type is called herbaceous, and these are soft green stems. So things like sunflower, pea plants, grass, all of these, clovers, all of these have soft green stems which are easily broken. You can easily go up to a dandelion and pinch off its stem. That would be an herbaceous stem. The other type of stem is called a woody stem, and they're called this because they are made of wood. And these stems are going to be rigid and strong, and your trees are going to have woody stems, and also some of your bushes like rose bushes. So if you've ever been near a rose bush and tried to pick a rose, it can be a little difficult, and that's because the stem has wood in it, so it makes it a little bit stronger and harder for you to pull the rose off. When you look at a tree stem, because trees grow and live year after year after year, each year they grow, they put on a new layer inside. So you can actually cut through a tree trunk and you can actually count how many rings are inside that tree trunk, and you can get the age of the tree. Here are examples of some of our woody stems. We have the rose bush, you can see the stem there with the thorns, and then we have a very large evergreen tree. And here's an example of the cross-section of a trunk where you can actually see the rings, and you can count to see how old the trees are. With this, if you look at the picture on the left, how to count the age of a tree, one light ring plus one dark ring equals 1 year of age. Continuing up the plants, we have our leaves. Our leaves come in all sorts of different shapes, and actually a lot of trees, to be able to identify them, that's one of the main features that you look for, is what does the leaf look like. Now, leaves can come in two types. The first type is simple leaf. A simple leaf has one leaf blade. Now, to explain what I'm talking about here, that means they'll look like it has one leaf per the stem that attaches it to the tree. So when you look at a leaf, you look at where it's attached to the plant and see how many leaves does it look like is attached to that stem that attaches it to the plant. Simple leaves, like your maple and oak leaves, have one leaf, or it looks like one leaf, attached to the one stem that attaches it to the plant. Your compound leaves have lots of little leaf-like parts attached to the stem. Clovers are the most common example of your compound leaf. What we call a three-leaf clover, that's actually a wrong name for it. It's actually a one-leaf clover that has three leaf parts. Now, the jobs of the leaves. There are two jobs for the leaf. The first, and most importantly, is that's where photosynthesis takes place. So this is where the plant makes its food. The other thing that occurs in a leaf is a process called transpiration. Transpiration is the process by which water leaves the plant through the tiny openings called stoma on the bottom of the leaf. Here is an example of some simple leaves. Each of these leaves that you see have their own stem to attach them to the plant. And these are examples of compound leaves. You'll notice that each one of these leaves, if you look at the one on the left and the one on the right, there's one stem coming down from the bottom of it. That's where it attaches to the plant. But if we look at the top, we have 5 leaf parts on the one on the left, and we have 7 leaf parts on the one on the right. So that makes these compound leaves. Moving from the parts of the plant, we're now going to look at reproduction in plants. Seed plants do not require any water for reproduction to happen, but you do need to have a way to get the sperm cell from the male part of a plant to the egg cell, which is in the female part of the plant. Now, with our seed plants, we can have 2 different types of reproductive structures. Some of the plants we're going to talk about have cones. So there's going to be male and female cones. The male cones will produce sperm. The female cones will produce eggs. And then other plants that we're going to talk about will actually have flowers on them. And in the flower, there are both male and female parts of the flower. The male part produces sperm cells, and the female part produces egg cells. Now, in the female cones and flowers, you're going to have a little section called an ovule, and that's where the egg cells will be found. And that little ovule protects the egg cell. And your male cone or flower will produce pollen. Pollen will actually contain little sperm cells inside of it. To get the sperm to the egg of another plant, we have a process called pollination. So that's the way that something, whether it's the wind or an insect, takes pollen from one plant, and that's the male sperm, and carries that to the female part of another plant. Once pollination happens, the sperm will fertilize the egg, and then it will develop into a seed. The seed has 3 parts. It will have a seed coat on the outside to protect it, and inside it'll have a little baby plant, and it will have some stored food. That little baby plant will need the stored food until the seed opens, and then the little plant can do photosynthesis on its own. Here are the reproductive structures of a couple plants. Up in the top left, the flower is the reproductive structure, and in the bottom right, the cone is the reproductive structure. Once seeds are made, plants need a way to get the seed away from the parent plant. They really don't want to drop the seeds right below them, because then you have competition for space, water, and sunlight. So plants really want to get their seeds far away from them. So if you think of the dandelion, a dandelion relies on the wind to carry its seeds away. That's why when it gets ready to go to seed, it's all white and fluffy, and when the wind blows, it carries those seeds away from the parent dandelion. Some rely on water to get it away, like the coconut. When a coconut, which is the seed of a coconut tree, falls on the ground, it's relying on waves to come up and wash that coconut out to sea and carry it to another destination. Some rely on humans or animals. Some stick to our clothes or stick to our hair. Others hope that animals will eat their fruit, which has the seeds inside, and then will poop the seeds out later somewhere else. And the last way is by natural explosion, and there are some plants that actually the seed pod bursts open and spits the seeds as far as it can. Now, once the seed lands, if it's a place where it can get sunlight and water, and it can get everything it needs to grow, then it will germinate. Germinate is the sprouting of the plant. The seed will break open and the baby plant will start to grow. Here is showing the growth of a bean plant. So we start with the bean, and you'll notice in the far left, the first thing that pops out of the seed is a root. So you have the root that will actually be out for a while seeking out water for the baby plant that's inside the seed. And then you start, in the third picture, you start to see a little piece of the stem growing. And then you'll notice in the fourth and fifth one that the stem has grown and the leaves are starting to unfold. Depending on whether or not they have flowers or cones will determine what group plants fit into. If they have flowers, then that means they have a vessel inside of the flower called an ovary. These plants are called angiosperms. So if you look on the wall in the room, angio means little case and sperm means seed. So an angiosperm has a little case, the ovary, that keeps the egg cells safe. Other plants don't, and we're going to call those gymnosperms. Gymnos means naked and sperm means seed. So in a gymnosperm, the egg cells do not have a safe little ovary to keep them. Gymnosperms, most of them will actually make cones. So if you think of a pine tree that has a cone, that would be an example of a gymnosperm. And we have four groups actually of gymnosperms. We have cycads, ginkgos, conifers, and neophytes, and you'll see a picture of those on the next slide. If we look in the top left, you'll notice four pictures. The top left is a cycad. It looks like a short, fat palm tree. On the top right, you have what is called a ginkgo tree. They have very special looking leaves. They almost look like a little fan that you would fan yourselves to cool down. The bottom left-hand corner is the conifers, which these are your cone producing. So if you think of the word conifer, the first three words, C-O-N, that'd be your cone producing plant. And then the two bottom right pictures are both members of your neophytes. This is kind of where any gymnosperm that doesn't fit into the first three groups, it gets thrown into this one. This picture is showing you how fertilization takes place in a conifer. So you have a male cone that produces sperm, and that's going to be much smaller than the female cone. And you can see the female cone, much larger, that's what has the egg cell underneath one of the little pieces of the cone. And usually wind will carry the pollen to the female cone, and then the pollen will form a pollen tube and the sperm will swim and join with the egg, and then the seed will form. And in class, I will show you how the seeds, once the seed is formed, how the cone will open up and the seed will be dispersed. Usually they rely on wind to carry their seeds away. And in class, I will show you what those seeds look like. Our angiosperms are the largest groups of plants in the world. These are going to be your flowering plants. So they are going to produce flowers, which will be the reproductive organ for them. And we're going to look now at the parts of the flower, and I'm going to actually switch over to the next picture, and as we walk through the parts, I will tell you what each structure is and what it does. This is a cross-section of a flower. So basically I took a flower, cut it down the middle so that I could look inside. At the bottom of the flower, you will notice that there are some green leaves called sepals. Sepals are little leaves that protect the flower before it opens up. So when it's in its bud stage, your sepals protect it. If you've ever eaten a strawberry that still has the little green leaf structures on the top, those were the sepals of the strawberry flower. The petals of your flower come in lots of different colors and shapes and smells, and the job of the petal is to attract insects for pollination. Now, not all your flowers smell great. You do have some flowers that I'm going to show you pictures of in class that actually smell like rotting meat or sometimes like poop, and they attract flies as pollinators instead of some of your other pretty insects like your butterflies or your bees. Looking at the center of the flower, we have two brackets at the top of the picture. One bracket says stamen. Stamen is the male part of the flower, and you will notice that in this picture there are 5 stamen actually shown. They're going to be the smaller ones that have the little brown kind of teardrop shaped top to them. Now with your stamen, to remember that that's the male part, think of the word men that is in the word. So your stamen is the male part. And the most important part that you're going to need to know with your stamen is the anther. The anther is where pollen is produced. So that's what's going to produce the sperm cells and surround it in a pollen grain. And a good way to remember that anthers also are part of the male part of the flower. If you can think that male deer have antlers, your male part of your flower is an anther. The other part that's bracketed at the top is called the pistil. The pistil is the female part of the flower, and you have one in the center. You only need one per plant. And with the stigma, it's got 2 parts. The very top part that's labeled stigma is actually going to be sticky. It's going to have a very sticky consistency. And that is so when insects that are carrying pollen from other plants, when they land on this flower, the pollen will stick to the sticky stigma. And then the pollen will form a tube down through the style, and then the sperm will swim down that tube into the ovary, which has these ovules. And in the picture, you'll notice there are 6 ovules inside the ovary, and each one of those ovules will have an egg cell inside of it. Here are some examples of our flowering plants. Everything from your oak trees and maple trees, some of our herbs that we use to cook with, like our basil, and then you'll notice that there are some other things, some other plants, like our water lilies, our potato plants, rice, grass. These are all going to be members of our angiosperm family. This picture shows reproduction in an angiosperm. So the pollen from the male part of the flower, from the anther, will be picked up and carried to the female part of the flower, where a pollen tube is formed, and once the egg is fertilized by the sperm, a seed will form. And then we're going to have something amazing happen, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. Once the seed grows, the ovary will start to ripen. And this ovary is going to protect these seeds until they can be dispersed away from the parent plant and be able to grow on their own. When an ovary ripens, it becomes what we call a fruit. So if you look at this slide, everything in the pictures below, even though you normally don't think of them as fruit, they are fruit. And what makes them fruit is that they have seeds inside of them. So not all fruit, like apples and oranges, need to be sweet. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, zucchini, cucumbers, all of these different things that we see are actually fruit, not vegetables. Your vegetable, to be a true vegetable, you're another part of the plant. Maybe you're the stem of the plant, like celery. Maybe you're the leaf of the plant, like lettuce. Or you're the root of the plant, like a carrot. Those are going to be vegetables. With our angiosperms, we can have 2 types. And this slide here will explain in detail what the descriptions between, or the differences between a monocot and a dicot are. But I have a picture on the next slide that better shows these. Monocots, if you look at the top of the picture here, monocots are going to have one little leaf stem inside of the seed. That means that when this seed bursts open, or starts to split, and the plant starts to grow, you're going to start with one leaf on the stem. And when they are grown up, you will notice that their leaves, the leaves of a monocot, like in the second picture here, will have leaves that run from the tip all the way back to where it attaches to the plant. So their leaves are parallel, or their veins are parallel to each other. Also, if you are able to pick these out of the ground, You will also notice that monocots have fibrous root systems where they have lots of roots that all go out in different directions. And when they go to flower, their flowers will actually be in multiples of 3. So they might have 6 or 9 petals to them. Dicots, on the other hand, like our bean plants, or some of our bean plants, are going to have 2 leaf stems inside. So when you start to grow them, when the stem comes out, you'll actually have 2 leaves unfold. Their veins, like you can see on this maple leaf, so a maple tree is also a dicot. When you look at a maple leaf, you will notice that the veins on the leaf branch out in all the different directions. And most of these will have taproot systems, and their flowers, when their flower blooms, their flowers will usually be in multiples of 4s or 5s. For the last part of the note taker, we're going to look at patterns of growth. The first part is going to be talking about the life cycles of plants. We have some plants. Now let me explain the life cycle first before we go through what each of these terms means. The life cycle is the the seed grows into a plant. The plant reproduces, forms seeds, drops the seeds, and then dies. So the time it takes for the plant to grow, make seeds, and die, that is a plant's life cycle. So plants that do that in one growing season, so one spring and summer of a year, they're called annuals. If it takes 2 years to go through their life cycle, what this means is the first year they will grow, they'll go dormant over winter, and then the second year during the spring and summer, that's when they'll produce and drop their seeds, and then the plant will die. Those will be called biennials, and the prefix bi means 2, and that is on the wall in the classroom. And then you have plants that live year after year after year, things like grass and trees. These are called perennials. They just keep on lasting year after year. In the winter, these plants go dormant. It's like they're sleeping through winter. The last part of this note taker talks about how plants react to different stimuli. Stimuli is something going on in the environment that causes the plant to react. And the 2 types we're going to look at in plants is phototropism, and the word tropism is on the wall in the classroom. It does mean stimulus. Photo means light. So phototropism is a plant's reaction to light. Plants actually grow toward the light because that's one of the ingredients they need for photosynthesis. So if I had a plant in the corner of a classroom and the only light that there ever was coming from a window, if I never turned any other lights on, the plant would eventually start to lean towards the window to get as much sun as it possibly can. The other type of stimulus is gravitropism, and grava stands for gravity. So roots are going to grow with gravity. That's a positive gravitropism because gravity pulls down. So roots grow with gravity, and your stem and leaves actually grow up against the pull of gravity, so they have a negative gravitropism. The picture here on the left actually shows plants leaning towards a light, and the plants here on the right are showing gravitropism. Once a plant starts to grow, if I were to tip the flower pot on its side, like in the top picture, eventually the flower would right itself so that it's still growing up towards the ceiling. When I plant a seed in the ground, it doesn't matter if the seed is right side up, upside down, or on its side. The root will always fix itself to grow down, and the stem will always fix itself to grow up. This is Note Taker 23. Please do not forget to answer the questions following the video.